The desert has always been a graveyard of armies. But what we faced out there wasn't just bullets and bombs. It was something ancient, something that had been here long before us. That's what I keep telling myself when I close my eyes at night. When the sand creeps in through the cracks of the barracks, when the dry wind rattles the sheet metal walls, and I hear whispers carried on the gusts. Whispers that don't sound like the wind at all. We were deployed outside Mosul, early 2000s. The city was broken, buildings nothing but skeletons, children running barefoot through rubble. Our outpost was a half-collapsed schoolhouse turned into a base, the walls lined with sandbags, the roof patched with corrugated metal. We weren't the first soldiers to occupy this patch of ground, and we wouldn't be the last. The desert has a way of swallowing men and spitting out bones, and the locals knew it better than we did. The villagers nearby avoided us. Some were polite enough, but their eyes said everything. They knew something we didn't. At first, I chalked it up to distrust, foreign soldiers stomping through their land, rifles slung over their shoulders. But the warnings began almost immediately. An old man came one evening, walking with a limp, carrying dates in his hands as an offering. He handed them over without a word, his eyes darting to the schoolhouse we slept in. He spoke in broken Arabic and Kurdish, words I barely understood, but the translator pieced it together for us. Don't sleep where the walls still remember prayers. I thought he was warning us about insurgents hiding in the ruins, but the way he said it, the tremble in his voice, told me he meant something else. That night, during my watch, the wind shifted. The desert is never quiet. It breathes, it sighs, it moans through the broken glass and hollow shells of buildings. But this was different. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic, like chanting, low, guttural, layered with voices that weren't there a second ago. I scanned the dunes with my night vision scope. Nothing, just sand stretching out endlessly under the moonlight. The next morning, I asked around. The others had heard it too. Perez swore he saw a shadow move along the outer wall, but the floodlights never caught anyone. Simmons said he dreamed of fire, of a figure standing over his bed, whispering in a language he couldn't understand. We laughed it off. That's what soldiers do. Jokes are easier than admitting fear. But the translator, the kid we called Yusuf, wasn't laughing. He told us about the Djinn. Not bedtime story demons, not campfire legends. To him, they were real. Creatures of smokeless fire, bound to the desert since before time itself. Some could trick you, some could destroy you, some just wanted to drive you mad. Don't answer if they call your name, he warned. Once you answer, they own a piece of you. By then, I wanted to believe it was all superstition. I wanted to. But then came the patrol. We were sent to sweep the outskirts, a cluster of abandoned houses half buried in sand. It was supposed to be routine, clear, secure, report back. The houses leaned like broken teeth, windows shattered, doors torn from hinges. The air inside smelled like rotten dust. My boots crunched over children's toys buried halfway under the dirt, their colors bleached by years of sun. We split into two teams. My group took the house at the far end, its walls covered in graffiti and bullet holes. The moment we stepped in, the temperature dropped. Not cooler like shade, cold, damp like walking into a cellar. The hairs on my neck stood up. Perez muttered, "Jesus, you feel that?" I did, but I didn't answer. Not after Yusuf's warning. Upstairs, the rooms were empty. Mattresses slashed open, pages from the Quran scattered across the floor. One page was nailed to the wall with a rusty knife, words smudged, but still legible. I don't know Arabic, but I know what prayer looks like. I remember staring at that page and feeling like it was staring back at me. That's when Simmons froze. He had his rifle up, aimed at the corner of the room. I followed his sight line, but there was nothing there, just peeling paint and shadows. "You see that?" he whispered. "No." "What?" "There, in the corner." His hand shook on the rifle. "It's watching us." We stood there, breathing heavy, weapons ready. But there was nothing. No movement. No figure. Just the corner of an empty room. Then we heard the footsteps. Not upstairs. Not outside. Underneath us. Slow, deliberate, pacing beneath the floorboards. The house didn't even have a basement. We got out fast. We didn't clear the rest of it. No one said a word until we were back under the sun, back where the heat wrapped around us like armor. Later that night, Simmons wouldn't talk. He just stared at the wall of the barracks, lips moving silently, as if repeating something to himself over and over. When I leaned closer, I realized he wasn't praying. He was whispering in a language he didn't know, the same language Yusuf had warned us about. We kept Simmons off patrol for a day, told command he'd been dehydrated and needed rest. On paper, that sounded reasonable. In the barracks, it didn't explain why he woke up at 2:17 exactly, both nights in a row, sitting upright like a puppet and staring at the same corner of the ceiling. It didn't explain the way our radios hissed with a low chant whenever he was near them. No signal, no chatter, just a tone like vowels stretched too long. Yusuf refused to sleep inside. He dragged his cot out into the courtyard where the wind could find him. He told me the Djinn liked corners. They gather where the walls pinch the air, he said, eyes rimmed in red from not sleeping. They like thresholds, doorways, stairs, places that are between. Simmons wasn't just tired. Something in him had gone quiet the way a room goes quiet before a storm. He followed orders, ate chow, cleaned his rifle, but his eyes tracked empty space like there was a fly he couldn't swat, and sometimes his lips moved as if he were counting footsteps that no one else could hear. When the medic checked him over, Simmons flinched at the metal of the stethoscope as though it burned. We were scheduled to sweep a stretch of road that cut through an old district. Collapsed courtyards, frayed prayer rugs, a row of houses sagging toward a small mosque with one wall missing. The minaret stood, cracked down its spine like a marble tooth. Command wanted to know if insurgents were staging there. We'd taken potshots from that direction a few nights back. Before we rolled out, the old man with the limp appeared again like the desert had coughed him up. He pointed to the mosque, then touched his forehead and chest, then shook his head slowly. "Don't," Yusuf translated. "Not during the white hour." "The what?" Perez asked, shouldering his pack. "The time when the light is thin," Yusuf said. "Just after dawn, just before dusk. It is when the Djinn move." We were headed out at dusk. Orders don't bend for superstition, not when maps and intel are involved. We loaded up into tomb wraps, tires chewing pulverized brick, the sun spreading thin over the city like water poured on a plate. Simmons rode with me, across the aisle. I caught him watching the windows like they might blink. Half a click from the mosque, our radios degraded. Not static, not interference. It was that same chant, a pulse under the white noise, repetitive but with no pattern I could pin down. I thumped the handset. Viper 1 to Viper 2, radio check. A thread of words came back. Perez. But it was like I was hearing him through a hallway that curved away. We cut the engines a block short and went on foot, splitting along the collapsed Market Street. The air smelled like old spices and ash. We passed a stall that still had jars stacked along the back wall. Turmeric, sumac, something floral. Perez tapped one. The glass hummed like a tuning fork and didn't stop. He jerked his hand back. We moved on. The call to prayer should have come. It didn't. Just wind and the far bark of a dog, and, somewhere I couldn't place, the hiss of a kettle that never boiled. I posted on the alley mouth while the team cleared the first two houses. Doors hung askew, rooms eaten by sand. There were handprints in the dust, small, as if a child had put them there not long ago. When I stepped closer, I saw the fingers were too long, each print ending in a narrow crescent. I told myself it was settling, the way dust collapses around itself. I kept my mouth shut. At the third house, Simmons stopped. The door was painted blue, a slice of sky propped against a wall. A chain hung from the latch with a coin threaded through it. Yusuf inhaled sharply. "Talisman," he whispered, "to keep them out." Simmons tilted his head, listening. "They're not inside," he said. "They're behind." "Behind what?" I asked. He pointed, not at the door, not at the roof down, the floor. We cleared anyway, room by room, the way we had trained until it turned into muscle. Nothing living. Bowls turned upside down, a mirror face down on a table cracked like frost. In the back room, there was a rug nailed to the wall. It was heavy, woven with a pattern that made my eyes swim if I stared too long. Simmons lifted a corner. A draft exhaled. Cold, damp, as if we had opened a freezer. There was a narrow stair behind the rug. The steps didn't look like they should be there, cut too straight, not crumbled like the rest of the place. The dust didn't lie right on them either. It curved away from each step, a shallow hollow, as if whatever used them never quite touched the stone. "Negative," I said, leaning in with the light. House has no basement. I wanted to say it like that would make the stairs vanish. We're not going down, Perez said. No way. We didn't. We marked the location on the map to pass up the chain and backed out into the alley. That was when the first shot cracked from somewhere near the mosque. The sound ricocheted around the ruins, direction hard to pin. We hit the dirt, eyes on rooftops. Another shot, closer, a glint near the minaret. I saw a muzzle flash and returned fire. The others followed, short, controlled bursts. The radios surged back to life with clipped words overlaid by that same whisper hum. Shift, left, 2 on roofline, then scissors of static snapped, everything shut. We pushed up, hugging walls, leapfrogging doorways. Every time we moved, the wind moved with us, sand lifting and chasing along the ground like a living thing. The glint vanished. The street opened onto the mosque courtyard, a scatter of broken stone. The mihrab opened to the sky. The shadow of the minaret cut the space in two like a blade. Something tugged my boot sole. I looked down. The sand was sliding toward the mosque, not with the wind but against it, dribbling in one direction as if pulled through a crack in the air. My mouth went dry. Perez swore under his breath. Do you feel that? The temperature fell 10 degrees. I saw my breath fog once, just once like a fisherman's on a winter dock, then nothing. Simmons stepped into the shadow of the minaret and went still. Simmons, I called low. On me. He didn't turn. His head tilted, as if listening to a voice just behind his shoulder. His right hand opened and closed around the grip of his rifle like he was keeping time to a song. Yusuf wouldn't cross the threshold into the courtyard. He stood at the edge, lips moving in a prayer I'd never heard him say before. He pressed his palm to the blue bead on his bracelet until the skin whitened. A voice called my name. It wasn't loud. It was conversational, like someone had come up beside me. It was my mother's voice, or close enough to trip something soft and stupid inside me. I spun, ball climbing my throat. No one there. Just a low doorway and a length of shadow that swayed where there was no wind. Don't answer, Yusuf croaked. Don't answer if they... The minaret's crack widened with a sound like stone grinding bone. The line of shadow on the ground bent, flattening toward us the way spilled oil finds a drain. It brushed the toe of Simmons' boot. He gasped like a fish breaking water. When he turned, his pupils were blown wide, iris almost gone. He smiled. It was wrong on his face. Too many teeth, not enough warmth. They're beneath, he said, but it wasn't his voice. And above, between your steps. We're leaving, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look at the crack. I didn't say anyone's name. Form on me. Now. Perez grabbed Simmons' sleeve. The fabric steamed where Perez's fingers touched it, as if he'd pulled a pan from a stove. He yelped and let go. Blisters budded along his fingertips almost instantly. We retreated the way we'd come, back straight, weapon steady. No one ran. Running felt like the one rule you shouldn't break, like the thing that would make a chase. The chant followed, close to the skin behind the ear. It braided with the crunch of our boots and the hitch in our breathing until I couldn't separate them. At the last alley before the vehicles, a woman stood in a doorway. Black abaya, face uncovered, eyes flat as water in shade. She raised a hand and pointed to Simmons. Don't bring him, she said in accented English. He will carry them to you. Who are you? I asked before I could stop myself. Her eyes flicked to me like a knife. Between, she said, and shut the door. When we reached the MRAPs, the engines wouldn't turn over. The batteries were new. I'd signed for them that morning. The starter whined like a dog and cut out. We worked in silence, mechanically, like movements could keep the air from closing around us. On the third try, the engine caught with a cough. The chant thinned, then dropped away as if a hand had been lifted from our heads. Back at the outpost, we filed a report. Probable sniper from mosque roofline. No bodies. No recovered shell casings. We marked the house with the blue door and the hidden stair. We logged Perez's burns as contact with an overheated barrel. We did not log the woman, the tug of the sand, the voice that had said my name. We didn't log the way Simmons leaned into his bunk like a man listening through a wall. At 2:17, I woke to find him standing again, eyes open, watching the corner where two concrete seams met. His lips moved. The language had hard stops and soft hisses, like wind through reeds and teeth clicking on glass. What are you hearing? I asked before I could stop the question from escaping. He smiled without turning. They say, he whispered, tomorrow is the white hour. They want us back at the stairs. I held my breath until my ribs ached and didn't answer. Outside, the desert exhaled, slow, patient, ancient, like it had all the time in the world to pull us under. And in the morning, orders came down, return to the district, clear the mosque, search for caches. We were going back. The sun hung low, a coin being swallowed by the horizon, when Yusuf touched my sleeve and murmured, "This is how the oldest wars start. When you step across a threshold and forget to ask who built it." We didn't have a choice. Or maybe that was exactly the lie they wanted us to believe. We prepped in silence, and as the engines rumbled alive, somewhere under the noise, under the routine and the steel and the ache, I heard a whisper I refused to answer, calling my name from the bottom of a stairwell that wasn't supposed to exist. The order was simple on paper. Sweep the mosque, clear the ruins, report findings. But after what we had seen, none of us believed it was going to be simple. Soldiers learn early on that the most dangerous missions are the ones wrapped in routine. This one carried the weight of something else, a pull, like gravity, drawing us back into a place we had already trespassed. We rolled out at dusk. Same convoy, same route. The air was hot, but it carried a stillness I'd never felt in Iraq before. No children in the streets, no shopkeepers, not even dogs sniffing at trash. The city felt emptied, like someone had rung a silent bell that told the living to hide. Even the wind seemed to die the closer we got. Perez sat across from me, flexing his burned fingers. The blisters were raw, shiny under fresh gauze. He kept his eyes on Simmons, who swayed slightly with the hum of the engine, lips moving silently again. I could see Perez thinking the same thing I was. This wasn't our brother in arms anymore. Something had its hooks in him. When we dismounted, Yusuf refused to step beyond the first row of houses. He looked at me, fear carved into his face deeper than any lines of age could manage. "They will not forgive this," he said. "Orders." I muttered, but the words felt weak, even in my own mouth. The courtyard was the same. Shattered stones, cracked minaret, shadow cutting across the ground like a scar. But the air, God, the air. It pressed against my skin like a damp cloth, heavy, choking. It smelled of iron, and the faint sweetness of rot. Inside the mosque, the mihrab wall opened like a throat. The stairs were there again, behind that nailed-up rug, just as wrong as before, cut too clean, dust curling away. The silence pressed, so hard my ears rang. "Clear it," came the order through comms. But the words faltered with static, drawn out like they were passing through water. We stacked up anyway, rifles raised, lights sweeping the dark. Perez whispered, "This is bullshit," but didn't fall back. We went down. The steps led deeper than they should have. A schoolhouse might have a basement, but this was a descent. The walls were carved with shapes I couldn't name, patterns that shifted when my light swept over them. Lines that seemed to crawl into new positions when I blinked. My chest tightened with each step, as though the air was thickening, heavy with centuries of prayers that had curdled into something else. At the bottom, we found a chamber. Circular, low ceiling. The floor was littered with broken tiles, each painted with calligraphy, fractured and rearranged into gibberish. In the center stood a stone basin, dry and cracked, but black stains streaked its rim. That's when Simmons stepped forward without orders. His rifle hung loose on its sling, his hand reaching toward the basin. Perez grabbed him, hissed through clenched teeth, "Snap out of it, man." But Simmons didn't move like a man anymore. He tilted his head, slow and deliberate. And when he spoke, the voice that came out wasn't his own. "You shouldn't have come back." Every hair on my body stood on end. The sound wasn't loud, but it filled the chamber, echoed in my skull like it had crawled through bone to get there. Perez shoved him hard. Simmons staggered, blinked, and for a moment he was back. What happened?" he gasped. His eyes darted around the chamber like he didn't know where he was. Then the lights cut out. Pitch black. Our NVGs fizzed static, useless. My heart hammered, finger tight on the trigger, but the dart pressed so thick I didn't dare fire blind. And then came the voices. Not whispers now. Chanting. Layered dozens, hundreds. Male, female, old, young. The air vibrated with it. The stone under my boots seemed to hum. And in the pulse of that chant, shadows stirred against shadows, moving in ways that defied the lightless room. Perez screamed, not from fear but pain. I heard him drop his rifle, clutching his bandaged hand. Later, he swore something invisible had gripped it, digging nails into the blisters. Up the stairs. I barked. We pushed, stumbling, half-blind. Something cold and slick brushed past my leg, coiling like smoke, then vanished. The chanting swelled, shaking dust loose from the walls. Behind me, Simmons laughed, low, broken, then higher, jagged like it didn't belong to him. I shoved him ahead of me, even as the sound tore at my gut. When we burst into the open air, the stars above looked wrong, tilted, as though the sky itself had shifted while we were below. The courtyard was empty, but the sand moved. It wasn't the wind. The grains slithered in patterns, spiraling toward the mosque like water circling a drain. The minaret groaned, stone cracking further, but it didn't fall. It leaned, impossibly, casting a shadow longer than it should have, stretching across the courtyard to touch Simmons' boots. He froze again. His shadow didn't match his body anymore. It stretched, twisted, reaching back toward the mosque, even as he stood in front of me. Yusuf shouted from the alley, his voice ragged, "Don't let it take him. It will follow all of you." But Simmons turned, eyes wide, mouth open as though something inside him was breathing through him. It already has. We dragged Simmons out of the courtyard like he weighed 1,000 pounds. Every step felt wrong, like the earth didn't want us leaving. The sand clawed at our boots, pulling back toward the mosque. Even Perez, strong as an ox, was sweating and shaking just holding on to Simmons' arm. The second we crossed the alley where Yusuf waited, the pull lessened. The air thinned, easier to breathe. But Simmons didn't blink, didn't speak. He just stared ahead with those blown-out pupils, lips twitching as though mouthing prayers he didn't know. We got him back to the outpost. No one spoke on the drive, not even over comms. The radios hissed with faint whispers the whole way, and every time I tried to adjust the frequency, the voices seemed to laugh, soft, mocking, like they knew we were listening. That night, Simmons screamed. Not once, not a nightmare's cry, but a guttural wail that tore through the barracks like shrapnel. We were on him instantly, holding him down as his body convulsed. His burns, ones he didn't even have, blistered across his arms and neck right before our eyes, skin bubbling, as if someone pressed hot iron to him. "Hold him," the medic shouted. But when I looked into his face, it wasn't Simmons anymore. His mouth opened wider than a jaw should go, eyes rolling white, and from deep in his throat came words none of us could understand. Harsh syllables, broken chants, the same rhythm we'd heard in the mosque. Perez clamped a hand over his mouth to stop him biting his tongue. The second he touched him, his bandaged fingers split open, skin peeling like paper. He screamed, fell back, clutching his hand. The room smelled of burnt copper. Then, just as suddenly, Simmons went limp. His eyes rolled back into place. He blinked, tears streaking his dirt-caked face. "Please," he whispered, voice raw. "Don't let me go back there." The medic wrapped him, sedated him, strapped him down for his own safety. But no one slept after that. By morning, command wanted answers. A local cache, a hidden network, anything to explain why our patrol came back half-broken. We told them about the sniper fire, about odd acoustics, about possible gas leaks in the ruins. We didn't tell them about shadows that moved on their own or voices calling names. But someone must have suspected, because before sundown, another unit arrived, specialists, they called themselves. Not uniformed like us. Beards, dark eyes, local dialects I couldn't place. They looked at Simmons like they already knew what they'd see. One of them, a man with a scar running from ear to chin, pulled me aside. "He's touched," he said simply. His English was rough, but clear enough. "You should not keep him here." "What do you mean touched?" I asked. "Djinn," he said, and tapped his own chest. "They live between. Once inside a man, they do not leave unless forced. And if not forced," he shook his head. I wanted to laugh. Wanted to tell him we were soldiers, not ghost hunters. But Perez's bandaged hand, the blistering, the whispers that still clung to the edge of my hearing, they shut me up. That night, they performed something I can only call a ritual. Not prayer, not like anything I'd seen. They drew circles in the dirt, laid black stones around Simmons' cot, and whispered verses while burning something acrid that made my throat close. At first Simmons fought, screaming, thrashing. His voice shifted midward, deep one moment, high the next, as though something else spoke through him. Then the shadows in the corners of the room thickened, and the temperature dropped. Frost clung to the metal cots. I swear on everything, I saw a shape rise out of him. Not solid, not smoke, something in between. Its eyes burned faintly, like coals smoldering in the dark. Perez fired without thinking. 3 rounds cracked into the wall, ricocheting uselessly through the shadows. The thing didn't flinch. It just smiled, though it didn't have a mouth. Then it was gone. The room shook once, and silence fell. Simmons collapsed, chest heaving. The bearded men gathered their stones, their circles. One of them muttered, "Not finished. Never finished. It will wait." The scarred one looked at me. "The desert remembers. If you walk there again, it will follow." And he was right, because 2 days later, orders came. We were redeploying deeper into the district, back toward the mosque. Simmons begged us not to take him. He clutched my sleeve with hands that trembled, eyes bloodshot, voice barely a whisper. "They're waiting. Not for me, for all of us. The desert isn't done. Orders are orders." We loaded up and went back into the district. Every man in the convoy felt it. The weight, the dread, the way the sun itself seemed dimmer as we neared the mosque. Even the hum of the engine carried something under it, like a second note trying to cut through. Simmons didn't come. Command kept him at the outpost, strapped down, sedated. He wept as we left, his eyes pleading through the glass of the medic's quarters. "Don't go back," he mouthed, over and over. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The streets were worse this time. Windows that had been shattered now stood whole. Doors that once hung open were closed tight, chains across them. It was as though the ruins had been rearranged, reset, waiting for us. No civilians. No sound. Just the hollow thud of boots and the crunch of sand that seemed to echo far too long. We reached the mosque at dusk. The sky bled red across the horizon, the cracked minaret cutting it in half. The shadow it cast was longer than it should have been, stretching down the street like a black road leading straight into us. Inside, the stairs yawned, open, exposed. The rug we had nailed across the doorway was gone. The air seared our lungs, hot, dry, and sharp, like breathing in ash. Command wanted to clear, so we went down. The chamber below had changed. Where before there had been broken tiles and a dry basin, now the floor shimmered with water that wasn't wet, a mirror that reflected the chamber wrong. Too many men, too many shadows. The chanting was there immediately, layered, heavy, pulsing with the beat of our hearts. Perez gagged. One of the younger privates dropped his rifle and pressed his hands to his ears, screaming. Blood trickled between his fingers. And then we saw them. Not insurgents. Not men. Shapes. Dozens of them. Peeling out of the walls like smoke, but denser. Their eyes faint glows. Their forms twisting in and out of angles that didn't make sense. One moment they were tall, stretching to the ceiling. The next they crouched low, scuttling on limbs too many to count. Their voices filled the chamber, every syllable slamming into our skulls like a hammer. We opened fire. Reflex, training, fear. The chamber thundered with gunfire, muzzle flashes sparking across stone. Bullets tore through shadows, embedding uselessly in the walls. The Djinn didn't flinch. They surged closer, not walking but flowing, sliding across the floor as though the ground itself carried them. Perez went down first. Something invisible grabbed him by the throat, lifted him clear off the ground. His feet kicked, his burned hand clawing uselessly at the air. When he hit the floor again, his eyes were wrong, black, wide, empty. He smiled once, then opened his mouth too wide and screamed in a voice that wasn't his own. The young private bolted. I caught a glimpse of him in the mirrored floor, but his reflection didn't run. It stood still, smiling as he fled. He didn't make it 3 steps before the shadows swallowed him whole. The chanting grew deafening, a storm of voices. Lights cracked, beams split. The chamber shook like it was trying to collapse in on itself. "Fall back," I shouted, though my voice was a whisper under the roar. We fought our way to the stairs. Every step was a war, boots dragging through sand that wasn't there, hands clawing at our shoulders, whispers slithering into our ears. My name was called again, this time by a dozen voices. My father, my mother, my brother, all wrong, all twisted. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood, just to stop myself from answering. At the top of the stairs, the light of dusk poured in, thin and pale. It wasn't salvation. The mosque itself seemed alive now, walls pulsing, minaret groaning. The shadow reached for us like a hand. Perez staggered out behind me, rifle dangling, his eyes still black. He stopped in the courtyard, head tilting. "It's too late," he said, or the thing inside him did. "The desert remembers. You belong to it now." He raised his rifle, not at the enemy, not at the mosque, at us. I fired first. The shot echoed through the ruins, louder than it should have been. Perez crumpled, dust rising around his body. The smile stayed on his face, even as his chest stopped moving. We ran, out into the streets, back to the vehicles, engines screaming. The mosque shrank behind us, but its shadow didn't. It stretched, lingered, followed us long after the building was out of sight. Back at the outpost, Simmons was gone. The restraints were empty, buckles snapped. The window was open though it had been locked. And on the wall, written in something dark and wet, were words in Arabic none of us could translate. Yusuf stared at them, pale as chalk. They said, he whispered, "The war is not yours alone." That night, none of us slept. Some prayed. Some drank until they blacked out. I just sat, staring at the horizon, waiting for dawn. Because the desert does not forget. And when the wind howls through the ruins, I can still hear the voices calling my name.